Cheers and laughter echoed across the terrace of Fjordhaven Grill, a riverside restaurant perched on the banks of the Akerselva River, where Oslo's wealthy families were enjoying a serene weekend afternoon. Sunlight danced on glasses of shimmering white wine, on pristine white tablecloths folded to perfection. Amidst that elegant ambience, Amina El-Farouk, a young Moroccan girl, weaved gracefully between the tables, balancing a tray of drinks. Her faint smile, barely there, hinted at someone trying to shrink into invisibility. No one noticed her, until the moment the cheerful noise was torn apart by a child's shriek. Two twin boys, Lucas and Lias Bjerke, sons of the famous businessman Magnus Bjerke, were flailing by the riverbank. A strong gust of wind had swept away their napkins, and in an innocent reflex they chased after them only to trip and tumble down the slippery, steep slope. No one reacted in time, except Amina. The tray crashed to the stone floor with a sharp clatter. Ignoring the startled cries and stunned stares, Amina lunged over the railing, cutting through the crowd. Her shoes slipped off as she ran on instinct. Seconds later, she leapt into the freezing Akerselva, her hijab slipping from her head, the cold water engulfing her thin frame. She grabbed Lucas first, pushing him toward a mossy ledge. Another hand reached for Lias. As the current pulled hard, her fingers trembled, scraped and raw, but she hauled both boys to safety, coughing, drenched, their hair matted to their cheeks. Applause? Number. Only the sound of expensive shoes stomping on wooden floors. A man's voice cracked through the silence, fierce like a whip. Amina, are you trying to kill my sons? The entire restaurant froze. Magnus Bjerke, face pale with fury, stormed toward Amina like a suited hurricane, fists clenched, eyes burning. Lucas and Lias, still trembling, were being ushered away by staff. But Magnus didn't look at them. His gaze was fixed on the soaked immigrant girl, river water clinging to her dark eyes, and he unleashed all his rage upon her. You think I don't know this trick? Pretend to save them and then demand money? Planning to stage a lawsuit and drain me dry? Amina couldn't even stand. Her knees were scraped, her hands trembling from the cold. She managed only a whisper, her voice hoarse. I just saved them. Shut up, Magnus roared. A forceful shove landed on Amina's shoulder. She staggered back just a few steps from falling into the river again. The water lapped hungrily below, dark and cold. You're that kind of person. Lazy immigrants, always scheming, leeching off society, exploiting people's kindness. You think I don't know the hero act for compensation routine? You won't get a dime from me. Around them, murmurs began to rise. Some diners set down their glasses. A few discreetly pulled out their phones to record. One server started to step forward, but Magnus raised a hand. Stay out of it. She needs to learn her place. Amina bit her lip, trying to stay composed. She pulled her phone from her soaked jacket pocket, her hands shaking as she opened the camera app. She played the security footage, the boys chasing after the napkin, falling into the river, and her diving in to save them. I have proof. Look, it's real, she said, eyes glistening. Don't waste my time with this garbage, Magnus snapped, swatting the screen away with contempt. A migrant maid trying to tell me what to believe? No one stepped in, until a small voice spoke up. Dad. Stop. It was Lucas. Miss Amina didn't do anything wrong. She saved us, Lias added, voice trembling. Magnus froze. Amina looked up at the two boys. Her eyes welled up. Magnus's face shifted. Magnus stood frozen, as if someone had struck him hard in the chest. His hand hung midair, suspended between the impulse to hit and the weight of disbelief. Lucas and Lias, their faces smudged, clothes dripping wet, still trembled side by side, but in their eyes now burned a strange determination. No longer just frightened rich boys dependent on others. They were children who had witnessed the truth and dared to speak it. Miss Amina pulled us up. She didn't make us fall, Lias said, voice hoarse. I chased the napkin. I slipped. Then my brother fell too. Miss Amina jumped in right after us. Lucas added, his eyes red but resolute. Time seemed to halt. The earlier murmurs had now collapsed into suffocating silence. Amina stood there, still trembling, whether from the cold or shock. No one could tell. Her shoes were gone. Her lengthy hair clung to her cheeks, and her right hand was bleeding from hitting the rocks when she dove in. Magnus looked at his sons, then at Amina. His gaze slowly softened, rage collapsing under the weight of what he didn't want to admit. He had been wrong. From beginning to end. Behind him, the restaurant manager, a middle-aged man named Einar, stepped forward, his voice calm yet firm. "Mr. Bjerke, I've reviewed the security footage. Everything the children said is true." Miss Amina acted bravely. Magnus said nothing. He turned his face away, his shoulders twitching as if he were wrestling something larger than mere embarrassment, perhaps the shame of having let prejudice override reason. Amina bowed her head, her voice a breeze. "I didn't want any trouble. I just saw them fall. I didn't think. I just did what I had to do." An older woman, a regular at the restaurant, whispered to the person next to her, "People like her. They have the kind of heart many of us will never know." Magnus exhaled deeply, lifting his face to look at Amina. The aggression had faded, only ruin remained. He opened his mouth, but the words caught. Finally, all he could say was, I'm sorry." Amina looked at him directly, not with rage, nor with immediate forgiveness, but with the quiet of someone used to being blamed, who still chose not to surrender her dignity. The tension in the air slowly unraveled, like a tightened string released. A few people began to clap, hesitantly. Others stayed frozen, unsure of how to react. But amidst them all, Lucas stepped forward and took Amina's hand. Lias followed. "You must be cold, huh?" Lias asked gently. "Thank you for saving us," Lucas whispered. Amina laughed through her tears, her breath catching. She nodded, voice choked. "It's nothing. I'm just glad you're safe." Someone brought over a blanket. Einar stepped in to help, wrapping it around Amina's shoulders. The crowd gradually dispersed, leaving a soft clearing between the unexpected hero and the children she'd pulled from the river. Magnus remained in the background, unmoving. In his eyes, a quiet war raged between the pride of a powerful man and the undeniable truth spoken by the very sons he thought he understood. The afternoon by the Akerselva River drifted on, but the air was no longer the same. The blanket wrapped around Amina remained damp and cold, the scent of river water and panic lingering in her throat. She sat on a wooden chair on the terrace, eyes fixed on the flowing water. A group of staff quietly swept shards of glass from the fallen tray, while the guests, shifting between guilt and curiosity, continued stealing glances in her direction. A shadow fell across her. For the first time that afternoon, Magnus Bjerke no longer looked like a man of power. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and in his eyes was a storm he could no longer hide. I was wrong," he said, each word sounding torn from deep within his chest. Amina looked up, her face still pale, not from anger, but from a quiet wound that hadn't yet faded. "You tried to push me into the river," she said, voice low but heavier than stone. Magnus lowered his head. He swallowed hard, his voice shrinking. "I have no excuse. At that moment, I saw my children soaking wet, a stranger next to them. I reacted badly. I let prejudice take the wheel." Amina didn't answer right away. A gust of wind swept through the trees along the riverbank, carrying with it the sound of rippling waves and a biting chill that seeped through her coat. "I don't want an apology just because public pressure demands it," she said slowly. "If there hadn't been a camera today, if the boys hadn't spoken up, would you have believed me?" Magnus remained silent, and in that silence was a confession louder than any words. A few people nearby began to clap, not for Magnus, but for Amina, for her composure and strength that needed no shouting. Lucas and Lias, now wrapped in thick blankets, were sipping hot cocoa beside her. Lias said softly, "Please don't be mad at our dad. He's not a bad person. He's just scared of things he doesn't understand." Amina gently brushed the boy's hair. Her eyes looked far away, and in her heart, a memory resurfaced of when she was a child, and her mother had been shoved by a Norwegian patient who didn't believe she was qualified to be a nurse. Her mother hadn't fought back. She just clenched her teeth and kept working. And now, her daughter standing by a foreign river had to carry that same weight. But this time, there was one slight difference. The truth had been heard, in the children's voices. Einar, the restaurant manager, stepped up. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm truly sorry, Amina. You can take the rest of the day off." I'd like to finish my shift, she replied. I don't want this chaos to ruin my work. She stood, a bit unsteady at first, but firm. From the terrace, a few diners rose and came over one by one to shake her hand. Some whispered their thanks. An older woman wrapped a thick, old woolen shawl around her shoulders. Amina smiled faintly, not radiant, but enough to say she still chose to believe in the kindness of strangers. Magnus watched her, his eyes weighed down. Inside him, something had collapsed, perhaps the ivory tower of privilege, or the ego that had never been challenged, and he wasn't sure he could rebuild it, not without her. The next morning, Amina El-Farouk didn't wake up to the sound of her alarm clock, but to the relentless vibration of her phone, rattling on the wooden nightstand like a small earthquake. Eyes still barely open, she reached for the screen. 7 missed calls. 113 messages. A message from her mother. Turn on the television, sweetheart. They're talking about you. They're calling you the Oslo hero. A message from Einar, her manager. Stay calm, Amina. Everything's exploding out here. Don't answer anyone yet. She sat upright, hands trembling as she opened the browser. Front-page headlines from major newspapers, both in Norwegian and English. Immigrant waitress risks her life to save billionaire's sons. The Muslim heroine of Akerselva. A blow to racial prejudice in the heart of the North. Accompanied by a video showing Magnus yelling at her, Amina being pushed back toward the river's edge, and the children stepping in to defend her. On Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, millions of views. A short clip showing her holding up her phone with the caption, "Truth doesn't need a skin color. It only needs courage." Had gone viral. Amina froze. A woman who had never wanted to stand in front of a camera, who had only ever posted quietly about books and food, was now at the center of national attention. At Fjordhaven Grill, customers flooded in. Some are hoping to see the real-life hero. Others, just there to film a story. A girl in a hoodie near the entrance whispered to her friend, "I want a photo with her. She's inspiring." Meanwhile, backstage, Amina huddled beside the bar counter, hands clenched so tightly her nails left marks on her skin. Jasmine, her closest colleague, gently touched her shoulder. "You okay?" "I don't know," Amina whispered. "I didn't save anyone to be on television. I jumped in because it was the right thing to do." Einar entered, his expression worried. "NRK wants an interview. There's a representative from the city council calling. And Magnus Bjerke is here too." He didn't come alone. Amina looked up. Outside, through the glass, she saw Magnus in a thick charcoal coat, walking beside a composed woman in a gray trench coat, Magnus Bjerke, his wife. Her face was calm, but her eyes were filled with emotion. Next to them were Lucas and Lias, each holding a crayon drawing. A simple sketch of a girl diving into a river to save 2 children. Einar said softly, "They're not here to cause trouble. I think they've come to say thank you." But before Amina could react, a group of reporters shoved through the gates, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Amina, how does it feel to be a hero? What's your reaction to Mr. Bjerke's outburst yesterday? Do you plan to press charges? As a Muslim woman, do you feel discriminated against in this environment?" Amina took a step back. She felt the air vanish from her lungs. The pressure around her was like yesterday's water, but it wasn't freezing river water this time. It was the blinding heat of flashbulbs. Jasmine quickly stepped in front of her. Einar called for the restaurant security to intervene. Amina retreated to the storage room behind the kitchen. She sat down, breath ragged, her back pressed to the cold wall. Moments later, her phone buzzed again. A message from her mother. "Let them look at you, but don't let them make you forget who you are." Amina rested her head on her knees. Not out of fear, but deep down, she knew she was no longer invisible, and that while it might open new doors, could also bring storms she had never been ready to face. Late afternoon, the fading sunlight slanted through the tall windows of Fjordhaven Grill, casting blazing streaks across the granite floor like fire. In a small back meeting room, usually reserved for storing dry goods, Amina sat across from Magnus and Magnus Bjerke. No cameras. No microfones. No audience. Only a silence thick as fog. Magnus sat upright, but his hands on the table twitched slightly, as if every fiber of his being resisted the words he was about to speak. "I can't undo what I've done. I can't excuse it. But I want to do something right starting here. Christina gently placed her hand over his, then turned to Amina, her voice warm. I watched that video over and over. Not just the part where you jumped into the river, but the moment you were pushed to the edge. You weren't afraid. There was only this painful emptiness, like someone used to being doubted. Amina didn't respond, but her jaw clenched slightly, her gaze steady, not weak, just waiting. Magnus drew a deep breath. I want to create a scholarship program with you if you're willing. For immigrant youth, named after my sons, the Lucas and Lias Foundation. But I don't just want to throw money at it. I want you to co-design it, build it, be its voice. Amina narrowed her eyes. She didn't look away. I don't need you to do this to redeem yourself, she said quietly. If this is just to cleanse your image after the social media backlash, I'm not interested. Magnus nodded slowly. I understand. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I ask for a chance to learn again, from the beginning. A long pause. Then Amina spoke. I won't accept the role of someone being helped. If I join, I'm the architect of this. Not a symbol, not a lucky immigrant lifted. Christina gave a soft smile, her eyes misty. That's exactly why we need you. The door opened. Lucas and Lias entered, each holding a freshly drawn picture, this time of 3 figures. 2 children and Amina, standing in front of a school desk, surrounded by kids of all different skin tones. Above them, in crooked crayon letters, for everyone. Amina looked at the drawing, and for the first time in her life, she dared to imagine something she'd never allowed herself to believe in. She hadn't just saved 2 children. She might save hope itself, the kind suffocated inside countless young people who've been told they don't belong. The next day, Amina returned to work. She stood behind the coffee bar, still wearing her apron like every other day. But something had shifted, not in her uniform, but in how people looked at her. A few customers approached, not asking for photos, not shoving microphones, just placing their hand over their heart and nodding quietly. An older woman left a sealed envelope on the counter and whispered, "For the scholarship fund." "Thank you, dear." Jasmine came over and said softly, "You just lit a new torch." Amina smiled. This time, the smile wasn't sad, wasn't shy. It was steady, unapologetically clear. That evening, in her small apartment in Grönland, she opened her laptop. Her inbox overflowed. Letters from students and messages from Turkish, Syrian, and Afghan immigrants told her that her story made them want to believe in Oslo again. On her desk, Amina opened her notebook and wrote one line. Truth doesn't need to be dressed up, only faced without flinching. A week had passed since the Lucas and Lias Foundation Scholarship Program was officially announced in the national media. Amina El-Farouk, once an anonymous waitress, had become a familiar face on television, in newspapers, at educational forums, and within immigrant communities across the Nordic region. But with the spotlight came shadows. At Fjordhaven Grill, where she insisted on keeping her part-time job, Amina sensed a quiet shift, sharp as a blade. The respectful nods and warm, admiring smiles were now mixed with glances, cold stares, and whispered remarks just loud enough for her to hear. Play hero for a moment, and now she thinks she's running the place. Bet she's not doing dishes anymore, now that she's the CEO of a scholarship. These people sure know how to milk a sob story to climb the ladder. One afternoon, as Amina washed glasses in the walk-in cooler, she overheard 2 coworkers murmuring outside. Don't you find it odd? Everyone's treating her like some saint, as if only immigrants have compassion. Yeah. Honestly, it was just a lucky accident. If I had jumped in, would anyone care? Amina gripped the glass tightly, knuckles whitening. But she didn't step out. She was too familiar with unnamed assaults like these. That night, during a panel discussion on equitable education, while Amina answered a question from a student, a man stood up. Don't you think naming a scholarship for immigrants after the sons of a white businessman is a form of compromise? She didn't blink. I think 2 white children speaking the truth to defend a brown woman shattered more prejudice than any slogan ever could. On social media, an anonymous account posted a photo of Amina in her hijab captioned, "Today's immigrant hero, tomorrow's political face. Stay alert." Yet as venomous whispers spread, something else began to rise. A swelling current of support from voices that had once stayed silent. In Grönland, she was invited to visit a learning center for immigrant children. There, A Syrian girl, Malik, pressed a handwritten note into her palm. You made me want to study law to protect people like you someday. That evening, Magnus texted her. Can we talk about shielding the scholarship from political attacks? They're trying to spin narratives around you. Amina replied, I'm not doing this to be loved. I'm doing it because too many haven't been heard. At the restaurant, Einar, the manager, called a staff meeting. He looked around the room and said firmly, You don't have to like Amina, but I won't tolerate division fueled by jealousy or personal bias. If anyone can't accept her value here, the door's behind you. The room fell silent. Sitting at the far end of the table, Amina gave a faint smile. Not because she needed protection, but because, finally, someone stood up, not out of pity, but for justice. That night, she stood in front of her mirror. She removed her hijab, letting her long hair fall onto her shoulders. She stared deeply into her reflection. The physical scrapes from her dive into the river had healed, but the scratches from whispered scorn? She chose to keep those. They were the markings of the journey. One autumn morning, as Oslo began to chill and golden leaves covered the sidewalks, Amina received an unexpected call from the Norwegian Ministry of Education. She hesitated before answering. Hello, Miss El-Farouk. This is Daniel Halvorsen, Executive Director of the Community Education Reform Program. I've been following your work. I once opposed your scholarship program. Amina tightened her grip on the phone. I remember your name, she said calmly without flinching. And I'd like to meet again this time, as someone who wants to learn. I need your help restructuring our support system for minority students, not for media optics. But because I've listened to the voices of students who received your scholarships, I was wrong. Amina paused. I'll agree. But I won't be a token figure. If I come to the policy table, I speak, challenge, and expect my community's voice to be heard like any native Norwegian voice. That's exactly why we need you, Halvorsen replied. 3 days later, Amina walked into the Oslo Government Administration building, no longer the soaked waitress from the riverside, but now an official advisory member on the Minority Education Reform Committee. She passed familiar faces in the hallway, people who once criticized her on national television. They nodded stiffly. She returned the gesture with calm, steady eyes. During the first meeting, an older politician remarked, We can't over-prioritize immigrant groups. Native Norwegians need care too. Amina looked up, her voice low but resonant. This isn't a contest of whose pain is greater. It's an invitation to sit at the same table. Because education shouldn't ask, Who are you? Before asking, What do you need? The room went silent. Halvorsen nodded, publicly backing her for the first time. After the session, Magnus Bjerke, now the primary sponsor of the Lucas and Lias Foundation, invited her to a cafe across from Parliament. I have a proposal, he said. Another scholarship? Amina smiled faintly. Number. This time, something bigger. I want to build a leadership center for immigrant youth, run by you. Not just to serve, but to lead. Not just to work, but to make decisions. Amina stared at him. A center? What would it be called? That's up to you. But I believe it's time Oslo had a generation of leaders, not born from privilege, but from resilience. Amina leaned back in her chair. Her heart pounded. She thought of her mother, the woman once dismissed from a hospital job just for reciting the Quran during her break. She thought of little Malik, the Syrian girl, who wrote a thank you letter after receiving a scholarship. And she thought of the banks of the Akerselva, where she was nearly pushed into the river for a second time in her life, just because her name didn't belong. Amina nodded slowly. I won't put my name on it, but I will put my soul into it. That evening, she sat in her small apartment, staring out the misted window. Autumn in Oslo shimmered with warm golden lights like falling stars. She opened her notebook and wrote, I used to live like someone needing permission to exist. Now, I'm rewriting the lead role. Not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been silenced like me. Part 8. The battle in the kitchen, envy, fractures, and the question, do heroes get to live normal lives? It was a freezing Thursday evening when Amina returned to her night shift at Fjordhaven Grill, the place she had always considered her anchor of normalcy amid all the chaos beyond. But that night, another kind of chill, colder and invisible, settled into her bones. The kitchen was no longer filled with the usual laughter and clatter. Colleagues avoided her eyes. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when she entered. The spice cabinet she always used was suddenly locked with a new padlock. No explanation. Only Jasmine, her closest friend here, came near. "What's going on?" Amina asked. Jasmine glanced toward the central kitchen, then whispered, "Someone's saying you're turning this restaurant into your stage, claiming you're using this job to build your political image." "Who said that?" Amina's brow tightened. "Hakon," Jasmine said quietly. "He's upset his sister didn't get a spot in the scholarship round. And he said flat out that waitresses shouldn't go on television then come back to preach morality." Amina froze. Hakon, the longtime sous chef, white, born and raised in Oslo, the same one who used to help her during her earliest shifts. That night, in the break room, as Amina was pouring herself a glass of water, Hakon entered. The air buzzed with tension. No one spoke until he did. Funny how one dive into a river gets you speaking in Parliament. Amina set the pitcher down. Slowly. "What do you think I should have done? Keep my head down, wash dishes forever, so no one feels uncomfortable? If you were as humble as the press says, you'd have declined all the glory. Or at the very least, quit being a waitress. Because your presence here makes the rest of us look like background noise." Amina inhaled deeply, her eyes sharpened like ice. "You're angry because I got seen. But have you ever asked yourself, how many people like me have gone unseen for years? I don't ask permission to exist. I exist. And if that makes you feel small, then the problem isn't me." Hakon turned away. He didn't reply. That silence wasn't defeat. It was the bitter acknowledgement that he no longer had a justifiable argument. As Amina left the restaurant that night, snow had begun to fall. She walked along the Akerselva River, where fate had once struck. The water still flowed, quiet, cold, and deep as always. But now, she was no longer the woman pushed to the edge. She took out her phone and opened a half-written draft of speech for Sweden's upcoming International Education Summit. The opening line she wrote, "A hero doesn't need to live in the spotlight, but they also don't need permission to live a normal life." Back at her apartment that night, she opened a new email from the Nordic Center for Community Policy. Subject: Invitation to collaborate. Senior advisor role. National strategy on immigrant integration. Amina smiled a tired, worn smile. She turned off the lights, letting darkness settle around her. But inside her, a different kind of light still burned, not from the cameras, but from an unwavering belief. That is the voice of someone once pushed to society's edge, could tilt the balance of power. Oslo glittered under the night sky as hundreds of dignitaries from Nordic countries gathered at the Spectrum Convention Center. The Aurora for Civic Courage Awards honoring individuals who advance social justice were more anticipated this year than ever. The name chosen from hundreds of nominations across the region was Amina El-Farouk, a waitress, an immigrant, a Muslim woman. When the host stepped on stage and read her name aloud, a cascade of camera lights turned toward the front row. Amina sat upright in a deep violet gown with a simple black shawl, not to impress but to remind the world. She didn't need to change herself to be worthy of recognition. But when the applause thundered through the hall, Amina didn't rise immediately. She looked to her left. Magnus sat quietly. To her right, Christina and the twins, Lucas and Lias. Behind her, Jasmine smiled with pride. But in Amina's eyes, something deeper churned, a hesitation more visceral than she'd ever shown. Just hours earlier, while waiting backstage, she had received a message from a journalist. "Amina, someone from the Financial Oversight Division, alleges misuse of your scholarship program, claims of political leverage, and image manipulation." Another message came from a former Education Ministry official. "Someone's trying to drag you down before you rise too far. Some powers don't want someone like you to become a lasting symbol." Amina knew. Stage lights didn't protect her from the shadows of power. And in those shadows, someone was waiting for her to falter just once. She stepped onto the stage, applause swelling around her. The host extended the crystal award toward her. But Amina didn't take it, not yet. She turned toward the crowd, lights glaring in her eyes, but her voice did not tremble. "I'm honored to be standing here. But I will not accept this award until I've said a few words, not as a recipient, but as someone who once lived as a shadow. The hall went silent. I was once nearly pushed into a river, not by water, but by prejudice. And tonight, I know some wish to push me again this time, with greater force. But now, I no longer stand alone. She extended her arm toward the audience, where young scholarship recipients from the Lucas and Lias Foundation sat. These are the ones who will rise when I fall. They don't need me to be a hero. They need me to speak, even if it means losing everything. Applause began to ripple. Some stood. She continued, her voice unwavering but forged in steel. Glory means nothing if I lose truth. I will face any investigation or attack, but I will never apologize for existing visibly. Finally, she took the crystal sculpture. No bowed head, no tears for the press to capture, just a single nod from someone who understood. This was not the peak. It was the turning point. Amina stepped into the cold Oslo night when the ceremony ended, her fingers wrapped tightly around the glass award not for its value, but because it proved that courage can survive in a world built to crush it. Later that night, in her small apartment, she received a message from Daniel Halvorsen. They won't stop you. Real fire doesn't burn for applause. It burns because there's no way back. Amina gazed through the window. The sky above Oslo was blanketed in soft snow. Under the golden streetlights, the flakes fell steady, quiet, and dangerously beautiful. On a morning dusted with gentle snow, Amina El-Farouk returned to Fjordhaven Grill, the place that had once been her second home, the starting point of all the chaos, triumph, and trials. But today, she didn't come back to serve. She came to say goodbye. After the shift change, Jasmine hugged her tightly. Neither cried, but their eyes held more than words could say. I never thought I'd leave this place, Amina whispered. But sometimes, to move forward, you must step out of the place that first held you up. Einar, the elderly manager, handed her a small envelope. Inside was a piece of hand-stitched fabric with Norwegian words. Ikke et symbol, men et echo. Not a symbol, but an echo. Amina chuckled. Einar patted her on the shoulder. I never needed you to be a hero, but you were always the one who never looked away when someone needed help. That's what matters. 2 months later, in the heart of Groenland, once dismissed as a poor immigrant district, a 3-story building opened its doors, bearing the name Center for Stemmer, the Center for Voices. No flashy signs, no red carpet. Hundreds of people, all shades, all languages, from students and teachers to the homeless and community organizers, lining up to enter. They didn't come out of curiosity. They came because they knew this was where dreams would finally be called by their proper names, in the right tone. At the opening ceremony, Amina didn't deliver a grand speech. She told a short story instead. I was once pushed to the river's edge, and I thought that was the end. But someone pulled me back, the children I had tried to save. From today on, I'm not here to teach anyone how to be a hero. I'm just building a space where anyone can reach for the courage within themselves. The applause that followed wasn't the roar of a crowd worshipping a figure. It was the applause of people seeing themselves in someone else's story. At the end of the day, after everyone had left, Amina stayed behind to wipe the dust off the first table in the center. An old wooden table recycled from Fjordhaven Grill, a gift from Einar. Jasmine arrived and placed a handwritten letter on the table. From Hakon. What did he write? Just one sentence. Amina opened the letter. In smudged ink, it read, I used to think you were a shadow that dimmed everyone else. But now I see your light showed me I'd never learn to shine. Amina smiled. Not because of forgiveness, but because real change, when it's true, always begins with someone willing to look inward. Back in her small apartment, she sat by the window that evening. Snow still fell, but now, each flake no longer felt cold. They were like whispers from the past, no longer wounding, only lingering. She opened her final notebook and wrote one last line. Don't try to be a symbol. Be the quiet touch on someone's heart, right when they need to believe in the world one more time.